This video is about ledger line notes in both the treble and bass clefs. You can see some ledger line notes have been notated in the first two measures. Notice this note is called a line note because a line goes through the note. In each of these examples, the ledger line goes through the note. Both of these types of notes are space notes. Notice this note is resting on top of a line. No line is going through the note. Notice this note is resting just below a ledger line, and no line is going through this note either. Now, one memory device that helps learning ledger line notes in the treble and bass clefs is to use some of the memory tools that you've already been using in order to remember the notes in both treble and bass clef in the staff. So for instance, A, C, E, G, that's one of the first things you learn. All cows eat grass. These notes are A2, then C3, E3, and G3. You can use that same saying, that same memory device, for the notes on the lines, the ledger lines, above treble clef. One ledger line above treble clef is A, A5. Two ledger lines above treble clef is C, C6, then E6, and then G6. In our studies for this video, we're only going to be going above the treble clef by 4 ledger lines or below the bass clef by 4 ledger lines. So now let's move on to the space notes in treble clef, the ledger line notes, and this one extra note here that's resting on the top line of the treble clef staff. In order to be able to remember these notes, G, B, D, F, A, you might want to refer to the line notes in the bass clef. So again, here, space notes in the bass clef, to ledger line notes in the treble, and now line notes in the bass clef, and then space notes in the treble clef. You can use the memory device here, good boys do fine always, to hopefully help you remember the space notes above the treble clef, good boys do fine always, G, B, D, F, A. And notice this note is resting on top of the 4th ledger line above the treble clef. You can also use treble clef notes in the staff that you've already learned to help you remember the ledger line notes below bass clef on the lines. The treble clef notes in the spaces are F, A, C, and E, F4 up through E5. If you look at the ledger line notes, F, A, C, E below bass clef, space notes to line notes, you'll see that there's a pattern. F1, A1, C2, E2. All of these notes are considered to be line notes below bass clef. These notes are space notes in the treble clef. You can also use line notes in the treble clef to remember the space notes, the space ledger line notes below bass clef. E, G, B, D, F. E, G, B, D, F. Okay, so these are space notes, ledger line notes below bass clef. These are treble clef line notes within the staff. These are examples of ledger line notes in between the treble and bass clef. And for the ledger line notes in between the treble and the bass clef, we're only going to go 3 lines below treble clef or 3 lines above bass clef. Notice there are some similar memory devices here. The word face If you start the third ledger line note below treble clef, then A, that's F3 and A3, and then C4 and then E4. Look at the next measure, E, G, B, D, F. You've seen that before as well. And then the treble clef. Every good boy does fine. So the space note is just below the third ledger line below the staff. Third ledger line below the treble clef is an E. And then up to G, up to B, up to D, then up to F. Looking at the bass clef notes, A, C, E, G, you've seen that memory device before. Starting with the top note on the line in the staff to A3, but then ledger line notes C4, E4, and G4. And then lastly, G, B, D, F, A. You've seen that as well. Starting with notes in the staff, the first two, G, B, but then ledger line notes D, F, and A. You might be asking yourself, okay, that's great. We're using up to 4 ledger lines, either below the bass clef or above the treble clef. But I know for a fact that there's a C8 on a piano keyboard, that there's actually an A0 on the piano keyboard as well. How do you notate those notes? Well, here's just a little review of the ledger line notes below bass clef on the lines F, A, C, E. Here's where C2 is located, right here, C2. F, A, C, C2, right there. But notice there's a sign here that we haven't seen before. That sign is called an octave sign. And when you see that sign in music, and the sign is below a note in bass clef, that means that you play that note 1 octave lower than written, or an eighth. As you can see, without the octave sign, this pitch is a C2. With the octave sign, this pitch is a C1. So you would sound that pitch 1 octave lower. You can see now I've supplied the answer for not only the name of the pitch, but also its location on the piano keyboard. So notice the difference the octave sign makes when the octave sign is placed below a note in bass clef. Let's take a look at treble clef. These are ledger line notes above the treble clef. All these notes are on lines. They have the line going through each of the note heads. They're A5, then C6, E6, and G6. I decided to re-notate E6 in this measure. This note also is placed in the same place, but now it also has an octave sign. The result of this octave sign is going to be similar yet different from the bass clef octave sign, in that when you see an octave sign above a note in treble clef, that means that pitch is going to be performed 1 octave higher. 1 octave higher than what it's notated here. So this particular pitch would be E7.